So you describe yourself as an evolutionary psychologist, but evolutionary psychology has received quite a bit of bad publicity. So I was wondering why you haven't rebranded yourself as an evolutionary biologist.
Well, yeah. Certainly, some people don't like evolution applied to humans, which would include evolutionary psychology. I actually don't see any difference between evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology. It's just a different species that is the focus. And a lot of what I've done includes a lot of non-human species as well as humans. So I just don't see much difference.
Okay, and you're a specialist in sex differences.
Right.
And again, that's a bit of a controversial area. Lots of people get upset to think there might be hardwired differences between men and women. Why do people get so uptight?
Well, I've managed to irritate and offend many people, which is fine with me, actually. I think anything involving sex and reproduction naturally makes people a little tense. And it's also the source of a lot of conflict over sex, over mates in particular. And so
in all species.
In all species.
Not just humans.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. So, it's not surprising that there's some kind of cultural regulation of it. It just kind of keeps things under control.
Here at the moment, the Wellcome Trust, they've got this exhibition, the Institute of Sexology. We went round it earlier, didn't we?
Yeah.
You said you were quite surprised by some of the Kinsey stuff.
Well, I mean, he did his research, 50 or more years ago, and the U.S. was much more modest and conservative back then, so it was quite groundbreaking. Sometimes it's portrayed as kind of sleazy scientist sorts of things, but it looks to be very carefully done in many respects.
Okay, so he wasn't a sleazebag.
Well, he might have been, but he was also careful about his work. I mean, it was groundbreaking at the time.
Yeah, and important.
And important.
When you're out there at the cutting edge,
right.
it's quite hard.
Right.
And you're at the cutting edge at the moment because you've come up with a new hypothesis.
Right.
The vulnerability hypothesis.
Right.
Can you tell me a bit about that?
Sure. So when we look at traits that are involved in attracting someone of the opposite sex, attracting mates, or competing for mates, these traits tend to get exaggerated over evolutionary time. And the exaggerated traits are, in one respect, an honest signal of some underlying quality, even quality related to competitive ability, if it's kind of competing with members of the same sex, or in terms of the benefits conferred to potential mates. It could be genetic benefits, or it could be other types of more direct benefits. Now, what's interesting about those traits is that they are sensitive to environmental conditions and social conditions. So a peacock's tail, for example, would be kind of an iconic example of one of these traits. My argument is that, well, if we can figure out what traits have been exaggerated in boys and men and girls and women, then we can say, okay, these traits are the ones that are probably particularly sensitive to exposure to parasites, poor prenatal nutrition, exposure to toxins, ability to tolerate social stressors. So when things go bad, these are the traits that go first.
If we think of the glossy magazines, there's so many articles about your sex appeal, how to keep yourself young and attractive, how to find a boyfriend, how to find a girlfriend.
Right.
So why has science missed out on applying all of this to humans?
Good question. Well, it started out with Darwin in 1871. He suggested, well, we can apply this to humans and learn certain things, and that kind of followed along for a while. Then Darwinism fell out of favor for a variety of reasons. But the sex differences stuff never really got picked up again. A little bit with evolutionary psych, in the 90s or so, but mostly focusing on obvious traits related to choice and stuff. But really looking at it very deeply hasn't been taken seriously. The argument is that it's social, cultural sorts of things, even though there's lots of evidence suggesting that it doesn't work very well.
So social conditioning has remained influential.
Yeah. Even though it's largely wrong.
I've had sociologists or social workers saying, "Oh, well, this girl is playing with these girly type things because of the mother. The mother has made the child this way."
Yeah.
And you hear this all the time.
Right. Yeah, and that has actually been looked at in terms of modeling and kind of imitation of same-sex parents. There's quite a bit of work on that in the 70s, early 80s or so. Dozens and dozens of studies. And it just doesn't work. The evidence indicates that, that was a good hypothesis 40 years ago.
Right.
Turned out to be wrong. Some feminists don't want to deal with the fact that there are biological differences between men and women.
And I suppose perhaps we're fearful of genetic determinism. If you think a certain amount of your nature is hardwired, then would that make you feel fatalistic or defeated or?
Yeah, I think that gets into people's wanting to have a sense of control over their life and a sense of control over things that are important to them and things that make them attractive to the opposite sex, things that make them competitive socially are going to be inherently something that we want to be able to change if we need to. And it's not just sex appeal sorts of things, anything involving social competition will get that. And a lot of people just don't want to believe that, there are limits and constraints on what anybody can do. It's just the way it is.
Right. So there'll always be inequality.
Right, yes.
Yeah. To get the sciences to take on board the fact that the nuance has been missing and that sexually selected traits haven't been analysed in the way that you'd like to see them done.
Right. Well, that haven't been analysed at all, typically.
Right.
Except for height, basically, height and some muscle mass sort of things. But that was just incidental. There's an assumption that other than the height differences and whatever effect hormones have, it doesn't matter. People are the same. Or boys and girls and men and women are the